So one of the things about um, science in general that I think is misunderstood is a lot of people look at it and say, "Oh, you're telling us everything." Well, sometimes you find people using science as a sales pitch for things, and occasionally they're very right. Occasionally they're not telling you the whole story. And what bothers me is when we say, "Oh, look at the science," but then you don't think of the entire situation. You just think of little bits and pieces. And the trouble is when you then try to apply that to the real world, it doesn't work very well. So somebody sent me this one the other day about this company that publicly traded company never take stock advice from me ever. I am not a licensed fiduciary. Just don't do it. But this is their public statement, and it leaves me with more questions than answers if you look at it appropriately. And if you, so I'm just going to dive into my questions. So, and the things that I kind of did some research on and dug up and said, look, I have the more I dig, the more questions I have. So, what they're trying to do is mine the ocean floor for rare earth metals. So rare earth metals that are used in manufacturing and other things are very important because they're great for our supply chain and blah blah blah. What these guys are talking about is using undersea nodules to grab it because those undersea nodules do contain some measure of those rare earth materials. And if you go mine it someplace in Africa or someplace in the Middle East, which you can, it's messy. It's there's some a bunch of Canada. You can mine it all day long, and but it's still it comes with the problems of mining that always occur. So what they're saying is these things are polymetallic, high grade, four critical metals: nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. These are things that we actually do need. Copper prices, especially for a while, were so expensive that people were stripping out abandoned homes and pulling all the copper wire out to sell it for recycling. It was illegal, but they were doing it. Now they're claiming, oh, far offshore, away from people. That's very true, very deep. That's very true, but that lends more problems than you think because what they're talking about is 4,000 to 6,000 meters underwater, which is 400 to 600 times atmospheric pressure. It's a harsh environment. We're talking deeper than the Titanic. It ain't easy to get down there and back. So they're going to do it unmanned, which lends itself to some other problems, but one thing at a time. They're claiming these things are unattached, so they're just laying around the seabed floor. And that's not always true. There are some, but that's not, you're not going to get enough for industrial purposes, just grabbing the unattached ones. You're going to have to dig at some point. No tailings, near zero waste. That's not true at all. You can't take the entire thing and turn it into a usable product, but sure, we'll let you get away with that one. Portable nodules are transferred to a bulk carrier, then go places with existing infrastructure and low carbon power. This one, okay, sure. Once you mine something, you can move it around. Understood. Happens all the time. The trouble I have here is once you get it into your rig offshore, you then have to transfer it to another boat to get it where it needs to go, some kind of cargo vessel. Um, that's not easy to do out at sea with even a calm sea with a couple foot waves, transferring metric tons of stuff from one boat to another. I don't know how you're going to pull that off. Unless you use the mining ship to actually be the transport ship as well, in which case you got to build a whole bunch of new ships, and that's another far more expensive problem. But the one that got me was not all this stuff, and these are not transport ships; these are mining ships. So you have to transfer it from here to something else, and I don't see how you do that at sea at scale. Um, that's a problem. So remember when I told you that they said, "Oh, look, we're going to just pick them off the floor. We're going to pick them off the seabed floor. Just pick them up, grab." Then why do you claim over here um, mining all over the place, right? So you're not talking about just um, pulling things up off the floor. They're talking about actual mining, and they even highlight it that they're talking about mining in a few places. Which okay, awesome. If you're going to mine, be honest about it up front. You're not just picking them up off the floor and walking around. And it kind of was like, all right, yeah, okay, we're splitting hairs. And then I get to this chart, page 11, and I have to actually stop for a moment and pull up my notes on this one because it involves numbers, and I never do numbers from memory. What they're trying to do is show you the seafloor nodule and say, look at all these percentages of different things that you get out of it: manganese, cobalt, nickel, and copper. And they give you these percentages, but then it's got this little one right here. And I'm like, what does that one say? And they put it in this text that's really hard to read down here. and they kind of show this manganese percentage is high, the cobalt percentage is high, and it turns out that's from a different kind of nodule than you find on the seabed floor in the areas you're talking about doing this, and they have to highlight it down here, which makes it really hard to read, but it's there. And the actual percentages are significantly lower. So manganese drops to 23%. No, so it goes to 20. Yeah, it's about the same. Cobalt drops to 0.2, nickel drops to 1.3, and copper drops to 1.1. And then if you go dig deeper in here, they've got some results of actual tests they did later in the presentation right there. So that's actual tests they did. But if you go back and look at the actual tests and run the numbers, looks like my math is right, usually is. What they got was about 23% manganese. So that number is way high, or not way high, but it's high, not compared to the others. Cobalt, you get 0.1. That's, you're telling me 11 here, but then your test results gave you 0.1. How you going to get here, right? That's a big number difference. Nickel, they're claiming 43, and in their test run, they had 1%. And in copper, instead of 18%, they had 0.7. So, they use science in this case, in my opinion, to dress up a lot of things to make it look really good. They've got all these nice scientific terms. They've got all these nice things that in an idealized case would probably work exactly the way they said they're going to. The trouble is we don't live in an idealized world. So all this stuff that's being claimed here might be true, but only if you look here. The trouble is when you get out into an engineering project, you're not looking at here, you're looking at here, and a lot of other things impact your project. And when you see sales pitches like this, it always makes me want to dig and go, okay, what are you really doing here? And it looks like they want to build cool ships and mine stuff off the seafloor because it's not been done before commonly, right? So I so many problems. And this is personal opinion. Remember, never take advice from me as far as an investment decision. But one of the things that does drive me crazy is when people want to use science to advance something, but then they're not using science properly. Use it correctly or don't use it. I don't really care which one you're going to do, but at least use it properly. And use properly, if you implement the science the right way, maybe there's an argument to do this, but you're hiding something behind the numbers. And that is not a good thing to me. Yes, you're telling the truth, but you're telling the truth framed in this little space. And if you frame it in this little space and then you don't look big and wide, that's where companies lose a lot of money on engineering projects because somebody goes, oh, cool, that looks great, right? And they didn't think to look, 10 degrees off axis. And it's that stuff that's off axis that is where the real money is either made or lost, is in the stuff you're not talking about. So they didn't look big picture, in my opinion. And they need to, or they're going to lose a lot of investor money. There are other ways to get rare earth materials that are far cheaper than this. There's even groups looking at doing it with some severe alternative methods, but that are probably cheaper than this. And the other trouble I have is they forgot to talk about safety, because remember back at the beginning I talked about pressure. If you're going to send mining vessels up and down between 400 atmospheres and 600 atmospheres, nowhere in there do they talk about maintenance of those vessels. You're not going to be able to do it forever, right? You're going to have to do maintenance on those vessels. They're going to have a certain lifetime. If you're going up and down often, those things are going to have stress cracks. We all saw what happened with the ship taking tourists down to the Titanic. So the Navy doesn't leave submarines out at sea they don't leave them in service forever, right? They eventually wear out because you have those changes in pressure. You just can't use them forever. So, it drives me crazy when people use science incorrectly as a sales pitch and then they successfully sell it. But, at the end of the day, the companies, I don't think it's going to make any money. So if you see any examples of where you have questions, where you think somebody's using science and not telling you everything, be sure to drop me a line. Always happy to take a look at it. Maybe do a live stream. We can always talk about it together. But this is one in particular that I looked at. I'm like, these guys are just not telling the whole truth. Telling the truth within a certain little tiny reference frame. And that reference frame is not real world, is not engineering, and it is certainly not going to lead to the results that they're claiming they're doing because they forgot about 50 other things. And then they kind of say, oh, look, the numbers are big, but the numbers are really small. But maybe we can make them big because we live in fantasy land or something. I don't know. But the other thing you have to remember about rare earth materials, which is what they're talking about, is they're not shockingly rare. They're just tough to get out of the ground and refine. So they're around. We just have to be willing to actually go mine them and refine them. And personal opinion, I think looking at refining techniques and further improved mining techniques would probably be a better way to do it. Because this is going to be a bunch of money thrown after something that would be better spent someplace else. Everybody have a great day. We'll talk to you on the next video.